Boyfriend dumped me after I lost my job. You're a loser. Became his new boss after getting promoted. In 2015, my life hit rock bottom in ways I never saw coming. At the time, I was working at a mid-sized publishing house in Houston, Texas. The pay wasn't fantastic, but I loved what I did, and it felt stable, until it wasn't. Rumors about layoffs had been swirling for months, but I convinced myself I'd be safe. I wasn't. One Friday morning, they called a mandatory staff meeting. My manager stood at the front of the room, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His voice wavered as he explained that budget cuts were inevitable, and some positions would be eliminated immediately. I remember staring at the cheap coffee in my mug, praying my name wouldn't be on the list. It was. I walked out of that office with a severance package in one hand and my self-worth in the gutter. When I got home, Axel, my boyfriend of 2 years, was exactly where I'd left him, on the couch, controller in hand, playing one of his endless online games. He barely glanced up when I walked in. "How'd it go?" he asked casually, like I'd just come back from a grocery run. I told him everything. I thought he'd hug me, tell me it was going to be okay, or at least offer some kind of comfort. Instead, he sighed loudly, put down his controller, and said, "So, what's your plan now? You can't just sit around and do nothing." The words hit me like a slap. I felt my face flush as I tried to explain that I needed time to figure things out. But Axel didn't care. Over the next few weeks, his indifference turned into outright disdain. He started making little comments here and there, like, "Maybe if you worked harder, you'd still have a job," or, "Do you even know what you're good at?" I tried to ignore him, but the words burrowed deep. I spent my days applying to every job I could find. Nights were worse. Axel would sit in the living room, playing games or watching TV, while I cried quietly in the bedroom. One night, he came in and told me I was too dramatic. That was his solution, just stop being upset. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning. I was at the kitchen table, laptop open, trying to figure out how to make my dwindling savings stretch until I landed something. Axel strolled in with his coffee and sat down across from me. His expression was serious. "We need to talk," he said. "Okay," I answered cautiously. "This isn't working for me anymore," he said flatly. "I can't be with someone who doesn't have their life together. It's embarrassing." I stared at him, my mind racing to catch up. "Excuse me?" "You're dragging me down, Zara," he said. "I need someone who's motivated, who can keep up with me. You're just stuck." My hands were shaking. "Axel, I just lost my job. I'm doing everything I can." "And it's not enough," he interrupted. "I'm sorry, but I'm done." He stood up, drained his coffee, and left the room. I sat there, stunned, staring at the empty chair across from me. Later that afternoon, he packed up his stuff and left. He didn't even bother taking everything, just the essentials. It was like I wasn't worth the effort. For weeks, I was a wreck. I'd never felt so small, so worthless. But eventually, the anger started to outweigh the sadness. Axel had called me a loser. A loser. I repeated the word in my head until it lost its power. I wasn't a loser. I was a woman who'd hit a rough patch, and I wasn't about to let some arrogant, mediocre man be right about me. I threw myself into the job hunt. I rewrote my resume, practiced interviews, and reached out to old contacts. It was exhausting, and there were plenty of days when I felt like giving up. But then, 6 months later, I landed a job at a tech startup in Austin. It wasn't my dream job, but it was something, and it came with potential. At first, I was just a content manager, writing blogs and overseeing social media campaigns. But I worked my ass off, staying late, learning new skills, and volunteering for every project. Within a year, my boss noticed my dedication and promoted me to marketing director. The company was growing fast, and I was right in the middle of it. 2 years later, the CEO called me into his office. He told me they were opening a new branch in Houston and needed someone to lead the team. He said I was the obvious choice. I accepted the offer, even though the thought of going back to Houston made my stomach churn. That city held too many bad memories, but I couldn't turn down the opportunity. Moving back was surreal. I'd spent so much time feeling like a failure there, and now I was returning as someone completely different. The new branch was my baby. I was responsible for hiring, training, and building the team from the ground up. One day, as I was sifting through resumes, a name caught my eye, Axel White. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. But then I saw the email address. It was him. My hands froze over the keyboard as memories of his words came flooding back. "You're a loser." I'd replayed that moment in my head so many times, and now here he was, asking for a job. I couldn't help but laugh. His resume was unimpressive, just a string of short-term sales jobs with no real accomplishments. The man who thought he was too good for me was now asking for my help. I decided to call him in for an interview. The day of the interview, I made sure to dress sharp, power suit, heels, everything. When Axel walked into the conference room, his face went pale. For a second, I thought he might turn around and run. But he didn't. He sat down across from me, fidgeting with the edge of his resume. Zara, he said awkwardly. Wow, I didn't know you worked here. I smiled, keeping my tone professional. I don't just work here. I run this branch. The color drained from his face. He stammered through the interview, fumbling his answers and avoiding eye contact. I asked tough questions, the kind I knew he wouldn't have good answers for. By the end, he looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Thank you for coming in, Axel, I said, standing to shake his hand. We'll let you know. He left the room, and I stared at his resume on the table. I could have thrown it away right then and there, but that would have been too easy. Instead, I sent him a rejection email, professional but firm. Something about how his experience wasn't the right fit for the role. It felt like poetic justice. After rejecting Axel, I figured that was the end of it. I thought I'd never see him again. But life has a funny way of circling back when you least expect it. About 6 months later, I was attending a big industry event in Houston. It was one of those networking expos where everyone is trying to make connections or show off their latest projects. I had a booth for my company and was preparing to give a presentation about our latest marketing successes. It was a big deal, and I wanted to make a good impression. As I was setting up, I saw him. Axel. He was wearing a cheap suit that didn't quite fit, holding a stack of brochures for some tiny, unknown company. He looked older, worn out, like life hadn't been particularly kind to him since we last met. He spotted me before I could duck out of sight. His eyes widened, and then he forced a smile and walked over. I could tell he was trying to act confident, but the closer he got, the more his nervousness showed. Zara, he said, his voice overly casual. Wow, this is unexpected. Is it? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Houston's a small world. He chuckled awkwardly and looked down at the floor. Listen, about everything, I've been meaning to say I'm sorry. I wasn't fair to you, and I regret it. A lot. I raised an eyebrow. You regret it? Yeah, he said quickly. You're clearly doing amazing, and I wasn't at my best back then. I was an idiot. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just let the silence stretch until he started fidgeting. Well, I said finally, thank you for the apology. It's long overdue. He nodded eagerly, thinking the conversation was over. But I wasn't finished. What brings you here, Axel? I asked. Looking for new clients? A better job, maybe? His face reddened. Just, trying to grow my network. Interesting, I said. Because I heard your company's been struggling. In fact, I know one of your potential clients pretty well. We've been in talks for weeks now. His face froze. I didn't need to explain further. He knew exactly which client I was talking about. It was a major tech company that could make or break his struggling little firm. They'd reached out to us first, and I'd been negotiating with their team behind the scenes. You're working with them? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. Oh, yes. They're very interested in our services. In fact, I think we're about to close the deal. Axel looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. I could see the wheels turning in his head, realizing how badly this could affect him. If we got the client, his company didn't stand a chance. I didn't realize, he stammered. Of course you didn't, I said, smiling sweetly. But don't worry, Axel. I'm sure you'll land on your feet. After all, you've always been so good at keeping up, right? His mouth opened, then closed, like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. I let the silence hang for a moment longer before giving him a polite nod and turning back to my booth. The deal closed 2 weeks later. The client chose us over Axel's firm without hesitation. It was a major win for my team and a fatal blow for his company. I later heard through the grapevine that his firm folded shortly after. Axel lost his job and had to move back in with his parents, for real this time. I didn't feel bad about it, not one bit. The sweetest part came a few months later when I got an unexpected LinkedIn notification. Axel had sent me a connection request. I stared at the screen for a moment, laughed, and hit ignore. Revenge isn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes, it's just knowing that the person who tried to tear you down is now looking up at you, hoping for a hand they'll never get. That's the kind of closure I'll take any day.